but what makes the program very special is that we have our own Rob Kahn, who is a ordained conservative rabbi, as well as a licensed Israeli tour guide. I know what it is to become an ordained rabbi, but I'm told that to become a licensed Israeli tour guide may be as onerous and as difficult. So he has both, and he's joining us from Jerusalem. So while it's 11 o'clock here, it is 9 p.m. 9 p.m. in Jerusalem. Let me take this opportunity before Rob comes on to tell you about the meetings that that Israel 360 has planned. We've been doing programs, many of you know, for the past several years, with an attempt to put on a program once a month. And so
I need to have something to put
so
your
in
coffee on.
February 28th, at 11:30 in the morning, we have a program called Meeting the Israelis. You know, the 10-hour difference between here and Israel makes it complicated to do a program where we focus on people in Israel.
Actually, that one starts at 10:30.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry,
mistake.
February 28th at 10:30. On March 21st at 11, we have a program about lone soldiers. In particular, an interview with my niece, who is in Jerusalem. She just recently finished her tour of duty as a lone soldier, having grown up in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm very excited about that program. On April 29th, we have a program in the evening, which is called Jerusalem Divided and Reunited, a tour of strategic Jerusalem. And then on May 12th, beginning at 10:30, will be a movie about Ben Gurion, the lion. What is it called? The lion of Israel? I don't know what he. But if there is another major personage that we want to focus on, Ben Gurion is really a good one. So our program today, I'm going to turn it over to Rob when he comes on. Those of you who are not familiar, I assume that most of you are familiar, that Rob not only grew up at Neve Shalom, had his bar mitzvah at Neve Shalom. He is the son of Judith and Gary Kahn, longtime members of and very active members of the synagogue, as well as Rob's entire family, his sister and brothers also are certainly connected. And perhaps the fact that we are planning to have 100 screens, I don't know how many, we have 70 screens at the present time, planning to have 100 screens is attributable not only to the program, but in fact to the fact that we all want to see and hear from Rob. I want to, while I have the opportunity to thank in particular to Michelle Kaplan, who is our for her coordination and her technological support. She's there on the screen, and she's going to help us if we get into any problems. I'm only worried about one aspect, and that is that when Michelle tried to put on the film a little while ago, the film went was terrific, except on my computer, the sound was very, very low, which is not good. So what I urge you to all do is, if you haven't done it already, turn up your volume as high as it will go on your on your computer, so that you get that. What else do I want to? What else do I want to say? Israel 360. The emphasis of Israel 360 is to give everyone access to Israel beyond the headlines, to meet real Israelis, to have access to issues of culture, of economics, of politics, of demographics in Israel. You know, when you absorb Jews from 70 countries or more, you have, it's a very complicated place. Culture-wise, cuisine-wise, language-wise, dress-wise, integration-wise. And so we don't really hear about that very much. What we read in the newspaper is usually about the Israeli relations or non-relations with the United States and with her neighbors and with the world community. So I hope over these, if you've been participating, you've seen programs on agriculture, you've seen programs on all kinds of different aspects of Israel that you wouldn't get anyplace else. So that's the address. So we have an Israel 360 committee, and I thank our Rabbi David Kosak, who really was instrumental in organizing this committee and making it go. Is Rob on, Michelle?
No, he's not.
Okay, so our program is going to be that I'm going to turn it over to Rob when he gets on. He's going to give us an introduction. Then we have a film. It's actually an old film. You might have seen on the History Channel, Mysteries of the Bible. Well, this is one of the episodes from Mysteries of the Bible, but it's really the scholars that they interview are top-notch scholars, and although some of it is a little dated. For instance, they say in the film that they have not been able to locate, I'm sure Rob will talk about this, have not been able to locate Herod's tomb. And in fact, over the last year or 2 years, after search and search and search, they really have found his tomb. I think also somewhere in the film, it says that polygamy is illegal in Judaism. Well, polygamy actually does become illegal in Judaism, but not until the year 1000. So I think that's in error. But this is really, when you go to Israel, and I hope you all have been or plan to go, not this week because the airports are all closed, but when you go to Israel, you will be exposed to Herod, because Herod has left, if you're going to an archaeological site, you are probably going to an archaeological site that Herod was instrumental in creating. But one of the challenges when you go to Israel is that you get all the history all at once, and it all gets jumbled together. So you hear about this guy Herod, but who in fact was he? He built these different things. So the first part of this film is really telling us who this man was, how he came to power, and how he got involved with all of this building. He is at a very crucial transition point in Jewish history, because he succeeds the very end of the Hasmonean dynasties, and he is the transition into the Roman period. He lives at the same time as Mark Antony, all these people that you heard of and you took world history. He was involved, isn't mentioned in the film, he was involved with Cleopatra. So it's, that period of history that is really a very exciting point in world history. That's when Herod rules, and that becomes a very exciting aspect of what we're going to see. I see that there.
He's just about to get on.
Okay.
Stand by.
Stand by. Let me go to full screen and get the gallery view. So I can see all the screens here. Okay, I can see a lot of faces. I like that. I can see Yaakov, and I can see Albert, and I can see Raisa, and I can see Jeff, and I can see Sherry now, and I can see Corinne and Larry. I can see Nan. Great. Where's Rob? So actually, what we did with the film is we've cut off about the first 5 minutes, which is an introduction, and I cut off the credits. I don't know that you really should do that, but this is a YouTube that you're going to see because we want to leave time for Rob's introduction and for comments and questions at the end. So the film itself is about 40 minutes. And I think if you've been to Israel or you haven't been to Israel, this introduction telling you really focused on the history and focused on this one individual who had such an impact is great. And it's going to, when you go back to Israel, you will have actually a greater understanding of Caesarea, of the Temple Mount, of Masada, of all these important places. Are we here?
No, he's trying to get in. Sorry.
Trying to get in.
Maybe if anyone has any questions up till now, we're happy to entertain questions. Oh, there he is. Hang on.
Where are we?
Yep, here he
Oh,
comes.
Rob, where are you?
He's joined. He's about to pop on. Hold on. There we go. Let's see here. Rob, you there?
We can't see him yet.
Okay. Let's see.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
How did they identify that it was Herod's grave?
I remember when the news came out. First of all, they knew where he wanted to be buried. He wanted to be buried in.
I'm going to go over that in detail at the end of the session.
Great.
If you want
There you
to
are. There you are.
Thank you.
I can see.
Hey,
So the first question I have for you, Rob, is: have you been vaccinated?
Yes,
You
actually
have
got
been
both
vaccinated.
shots.
Well, the
Yeah.
rest of us, and I look around, I can see mostly senior citizens. The rest of us are waiting here in Oregon to be vaccinated.
Well, I wish everyone good health and safety. And I really apologize. I really truly thought we were starting this at 1:30. And so now I realize I've come late to the piece, and I really apologize.
Well, we're ready for you. We have
Great.
71 screens, and which means we have about 600 or 700 people. And so we're ready for your introduction, and we'll go right into the film then.
Okay, well, so great. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in. And thank you very much to Rabbi Isaak for coordinating all of this. He reached out long ago, told me a little bit about the project at the synagogue. And I have to give you guys a lot of credit, kol hakavod, as we say in Hebrew, because to have regular programming about Israel for a North American congregation should not be taken for granted. So way to keep it going. As you may have heard, I live in Yerushalayim, I live in Jerusalem. And I often like to share what I heard before making Aliyah, and what I shared with my congregation before making Aliyah, which is not every Jew has to live in Israel, but Israel has to live in every Jew. And I really think that you guys are fulfilling that by making sure that Israel remains a priority for the community. So let's go ahead and start. Sorry that I missed the introduction, and you were already talking about the tomb that's been discovered. I'm going to wait and talk about that afterwards. As Rabbi Isaac said, the format's going to be me introducing a little bit, speaking mostly about the importance of Herod to me really as a tour guide here in Israel. And then we're going to watch a film that Rabbi Isaac found, which does a very thorough job pointing to different aspects of Herod's life. And then afterwards, I'll pick up where the film left off, since it's a film from 1995, and there has been an amazing discovery since then. And then we'll leave it up for questions. So it's not a short program, but stick with us. Hopefully we'll keep it interesting. So Herod is one of the most influential figures in the history of the land of Israel. When I guide, I like to make sure my tourists are paying attention and staying interested. So I often will ask questions rather than tell them something. And we can be standing in front of something, and I can say, well, who do you think is responsible for this? And for any of you, I'm sorry we're doing this virtually, but hopefully we'll have a chance to meet face to face in Israel. But for any of you who plan to still come to Israel, and the tour guide says, who do you think is responsible for this? Half of the time you can say Herod and be accurate and get the question right. And the other half of the time, just kind of be like King David Ben Gurion. Like, say that very fast, King David Ben Gurion, and the other half of the time, you'll also have the right answer. So I'm giving you little tips on how to please your tour guides, hopefully when you come to Israel. And indeed, 3 of the most popular sites that I take people to and that are ranked in the top sites in Israel, and sites that I'm sure many of you have been to, the Kotel, which I think is the #1 tourist site in Israel, Kotel, the Western Wall, Masada, which is #2, and then Caesarea or Caesarea, which certainly is probably in the top 5 or 6. So the most popular sites in Israel for tourists are directly connected to Herod. So I think what I want to do is just spend a little bit of time talking about, well, how do we know about Herod? After all, we're talking about someone who ruled here in Israel before 0. Just a little bit before 0, he ruled from 37 BCE to 4 BCE. So how do we even know anything about someone who lived 2,000 years ago? And when I explain this, you'll start to understand that one of the fascinating things about Israel is that there's a lot of gray area. You know, we like to debate even today about current contemporary issues in Israel. There's a lot of gray area. It's not always black and white. And even when we think about what are our sources for understanding the life of Herod and its impact on this land, there's a lot of gray area there too. In other words, there's a lot of skepticism and questions about the sources that we have. So one of the main sources, you may have heard of Josephus. Josephus was a historian for the Romans, but Josephus may have had an agenda in all of his writings, given the fact that he was born Yosef ben Matityahu, a very Jewish sounding name. So he was a Jew who was actually a leader in the great revolt against the Romans that began in the year 66 CE. So we're talking about 70 years after Herod died, approximately. And he was not a contemporary with Herod, but when the Romans were conquering his village, he surrendered. And the Romans realized he was very talented. He knew the history of the land, he knew the history of the people, and he would serve as a good historian for the Romans in telling the events, the background of the Jewish people and the events of what was taking place in Israel. So Yosef ben Matityahu, or Josephus, is probably our primary written account of the life of Herod. And as I said, we have to kind of take what he writes with a grain of salt, especially when we read about the story of what took place at Masada, for example, because he might have had some type of ulterior agenda or motive as he was writing as a former Jew. The second source for sure is archaeology, as I already mentioned to you. There is just so much that we can go to in this country. I only mentioned a few of them that trace their origin back to Herod. And that's because Herod had the resources of the Roman Empire behind him. So we sometimes call him King Herod, but he really wasn't king. He was really more like a governor. He had the Roman power in Rome behind him, the Caesars, for example. And because of that, as long as he kept them happy and sent them all sorts of goods and trade and taxes, they would continue to fund all of his projects. So he was an ambitious builder, as you'll learn from the movie. I won't try to repeat what the movie is going to say. And Herod also was really a very strategic thinking, political master, you would say. He knew how to pick the right sides of those who were going to be in power. He knew how to marry the right people who would help him establish his reign. And another thing that we'll learn about is he knew how to kill people, how to annihilate people who were threatening to his rule. So he was a very cold and calculating, some people say quite crazy, paranoid ruler. I think sometimes we exaggerate that a little bit, but of course that's what we like to do with history to make it sound even more interesting. The third and final source, I mean, there are a few other smaller sources, but one of the reasons why Herod, if you were to do a search for King Herod on the internet, you're actually going to find a ton of Christian sites who are interested in King Herod. And that's because Herod is mentioned many times in the Christian Bible, otherwise known as the New Testament. And these sources too, by the way, we need to be a little bit careful about. Most likely, we're not actually talking about King Herod, the Herod that I've been talking about with you, who lived from 37 to 4 BCE. We're probably talking about his son, Herod Antipas, who was his son and lived during the same years as Jesus. That being said, one of the most famous episodes with King Herod is a story, and this is why Christians are so passionate about learning more about Herod, is a story that's told in one of the Gospels about a baby who is being born in Bethlehem. And Herod is informed by this baby who has been predicted to be the new king of the Jews. And so Herod sometimes was called the king of the Jews. And Herod, as a paranoid ruler, etc., wanted to eliminate these unborn threat or about to be born threat. And he orders all babies born in the Bethlehem area and all babies under the age of 2 to be slaughtered. And Jesus, with his mother Mary and Joseph, they flee actually to Egypt. So this is a story told in the Christian Bible, which makes him such a fascinating character for Christians. I just want to pause for a second, because this is what's fascinating about history and religion. If you think about that story, it might actually remind you of a typological, mythological story that we have in other traditions, including our own. Think about Moses being born in Egypt, a ruler who is trying to eliminate the threat of a future powerful person by killing all the babies. It actually takes place down there in Egypt. And you can start to see that it doesn't really matter which Herod it was. The Christians are writing kind of a typological, mythological story for the birth of Jesus. And they're using Herod, who probably at the time of Jesus was still a very well-known figure, and was kind of like the symbol of power. So let's move forward. What I want to do is I want to introduce the movie, but I want to briefly, I hope this works, I want to share my screen with you and briefly take you to a few spots, and then we'll get into the movie, okay? So let's take a quick look. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully I have the access to do that.
You should be able to.
Okay, great. Okay. Sorry, I thought I'd have a few more minutes to get these things ready for you. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay. So as I was saying, this is just an example. Go on the web, look up Herod, and you'll see like his life is often set within kind of the context of a Christian world. And I do have to say, the movie you're going to watch, I think, does this because the Christian audience is so much larger than the Jewish audience. So for example, when the movie is going to speak about the temple in Jerusalem, I don't think I need to remind you, this was the central worship site for the Jewish people for about 1,000 years, give and take. And yet the movie is kind of going to act as if only the times Jesus was there is it really important for us to know about it. So this is just an example. You can see the relationship to Paul, the relationship to James, the relationship to Jesus. This is kind of like a family tree, and you'll find many of these, usually from people teaching Christianity. I'm going to move forward, though, to the site. Okay, so now you're looking. I mean, I wish I was in front of you and I could say how many of you have been to Israel, how many of you have been to Jerusalem. I can't do that, but I assume many of you have. And what you're looking at is this kind of this very well-known view of Jerusalem, where you're looking down at the Kotel, the wall, and behind the wall you can see the Golden Dome. So I wish we were there right now, but I'll just tell you that the wall, what's so fascinating about the wall, it's Herodian. That is, Herod was the ruler when that wall was built. But what a lot of people don't understand, because it is the holiest place in the world for the Jewish people, there's this great kind of dichotomy between the purpose of the wall and then the holiness and the sanctity of the wall that was built through generation and generation and generation of people visiting it. So what is the wall? Some people often are very surprised to hear that it's a retaining wall. Let me kind of try to describe it to you. I'm using my hands in case you can see me. There was a hill behind that wall, and there stood the first temple. But Herod wanted to endear himself to the local population, the Jews, and he wanted to show off his amazing abilities within architecture and design. And he built kind of a Roman-style temple for the Jewish people, but he wanted to build such a monumental building on the top of that hill. He knew he had to flatten it out. And then, like I said, like a landscaping project, he had to build retaining walls to hold the earth in. You're looking at a retaining wall that is holding a plaza behind it. The reason why it's called the Western Wall is because this is the western edge of Temple Mount. Where the Golden Dome is today is where the temple would have stood in temple times, okay? So also what you're looking at, the bottom of that wall, which is built with massive cut stones, goes 70 feet deeper behind what you can see where the people are standing. So it's really just always interesting for me to think like the mundane purpose of this wall, not actually part of the temple itself, but really made to hold up the temple that stood behind it. And of course, it's the holiest place in the world for the Jewish people because it is the remnant that we have of the temple. The Dome of the Rock, of course, is a Muslim building. Since the 7th century, when the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, you have the Muslim buildings in the place where the temple now stood. Please, if you have questions, I guess what we'll do is we'll kind of wait till the very end, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have. We'll move on to the next picture, which is kind of a cute picture because you see these people at the bottom of the screen. Some of you might know where this is taken. It is the view from the Mount of Olives, kind of technically, but this is taken at the Israel Museum, where the massive Second Temple period model of Jerusalem stands. And so it's actually the people in front of the smaller model. It's a very big model, but you can see the people standing above it. And you can see what the Second Temple would have looked like. Again, that Second Temple would have been in the same place that the Golden Dome of the Rock is today. A little closer angle of it. And now we're moving over to Caesarea or Caesarea. So the first site that we saw, you could kind of say his motivation was the Jewish people, kind of keeping himself in favor with the Jewish people, and also maybe bringing a spotlight to Jerusalem in the sense of wanting it to become a major tourist attraction, which it was. You have to remember, to build a huge temple for a God that can't be seen was a radical notion in the ancient world. So now we move over to Caesarea, and for Caesarea, you can think more about his relationship with Rome. He built on the sand dunes, as you'll learn more about in the movie, a major harbor and a major center of population. And if you think about it, the harbor, and you're going to learn about the uniqueness of what he brought to the Middle East, he has to make sure that goods are flowing back and forth between Israel, or known at that time as Judea, and Rome. And so what we're looking at here now is a picture of the amphitheater, or the theater that to this day is used for concerts and performances. Imagine some of the most popular Israeli artists perform here in the warm months of spring and summer and fall. And much of this is the original that was uncovered underneath the sand of Caesarea. And now this is a view from above. You can see how it looks out to the water. And Caesarea is a site that you need nearly, probably about a good 3 hours to really see it thoroughly. And so I'm just kind of walking you through it a little bit. But from that theater, I'm going to show you one more slide. This is a hippodrome. And you can really see, let me see if I can use this pointer. This area here is the hippodrome. Coming all the way back here is where the chariot races would take place. And they would run down here. It was 7 times around. Come around here, and you can see like just the setting is right on the sea. When we tour here, we walk along here next to the crashing waves, sometimes getting wet on this little promenade. We talk about the fact that the VIP seats are where I'm putting the dot right now, and that's because just like in NASCAR racing or other kinds of events like this, this is where all the blood, guts, and gore was taking place around the corner. And I'm only showing you probably about half of what we try to visit. This is where the palace was for King Herod, with actually fresh water, a freshwater pool in the middle of the Mediterranean, bringing water from freshwater pools through an aqueduct. I think you'll see pictures of that in the movie. And now we move on to Masada. Like I said, the sites that are so well known in Israel all go back to King Herod's time. And very quickly, because I think most of you are aware of what Masada is, this is the northern edge, okay, and we have 3 levels of a palace. This is the top level here, and then another level here, and finally here. And they say that the top level was for visitors, the middle level was for Herod's family, and the bottom level was reserved for Herod himself. And he had a bathhouse right here on the edge here, in his own private level of his palace. You can actually still see the frescoes on the wall. And you know, Masada is an amazing site with an amazing story, but it's not really the topic. In fact, what I often have to remind my tourists is that yes, Herod demonstrated his unbelievable imagination and ability to build on the fact that this is a unapproachable hilltop plateau. Like, he demonstrated that, and that was part of his objective. But also, this is now the paranoid side of Herod. This is really at the very edge of his rule, out there in the remote desert. And he would use this place in his own mind as a place to retreat to in the case that his rule was ever threatened or his family was ever threatened. We actually don't even know if Herod ever made it there during his lifetime, but it was there as a safe place, kind of like a Waldorf Astoria that was ready to be moved into if he should ever need it. But I have to remind my people, you all are probably aware of what happened when the rebels, 100 years later, came to this mountaintop. And I always have to remind my tourists, like, okay, we have to keep those 2 stories apart because they really are apart. Herod doesn't really have anything to do with the tragic end of the people on Masada. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen because I want us to get ready for the movie, the video. What I will say is that it's actually kind of I think about the fact that there's not a Netflix thing that has come out on Herod, because it's perfect for it. There was a movie in 1958, a Hollywood movie, which is hard to watch, but there's a 1950 movie on Herod the Great. But if you think about like Game of Thrones or The Crown, Herod's life has all of that. It's got kind of like, you know, the scandals and intrigue of the royal palace, and it's also got kind of the violence and the power and the evil of Game of Thrones. So maybe it's on its way. Maybe some of you will be inspired. But I think, Rabbi Isaac, unless you have something in particular at this point that you want me to share, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you for the video that you wanted people to watch.
And key to his success. Children and his wives. For Herod, of all men, should never have been king. Herod was really, on the one hand, a person of great ability. On the other hand, a very strange, in fact, sick person. In terms of his
I hope people can hear.
Politician, at the same time, he gradually turned his people against him, mostly because of what a maniac he was. He killed his own children and his wives, always out of fear that somebody was about to take over power from him. Nearly everything we know of Herod's life comes from a Jewish historian named Josephus compiled a biography of the king as part of a lengthy history of the Jewish people. It was this account that first revealed Herod's surprising origins. Herod's father hailed from Idumea, a district south of Jerusalem, conquered by the Jews and forced to convert to Judaism about a century before Herod's birth. His mother's people in the eastern kingdom of Nabatea built the rose-colored city of Petra. She was an Arab princess. Was Herod considered a Jew?
The question sounds simple, but in reality it's very complicated and depends in large part on whom you ask. So if you did not like Herod the Great, then you called him a half-Jew. You might even have called him a non-Jew.
Herod's mixed blood should have forever banned him from the throne of Judea. But world events in the century before Christ would favor his rise to power. At the time of Herod's birth, in 73 before the Common Era, the crown of Judea belongs to the dynasty of the Hasmoneans. A century earlier, this royal Jewish family had led the Maccabean revolt to overthrow Egyptian invaders and restore the country to Jewish rule. But in 63 BCE, the armies of Rome invade Judea. The once independent Jewish state surrenders to Rome. Herod's father, prime minister to the Hasmonean king, encourages a policy of befriending the invaders. The Roman governors reward him with wealth and power. Young Herod receives a classical education steeped in Latin and Greek culture. When Herod is just 25, he is appointed governor of Galilee, a fertile district north of Jerusalem. Here, he might have lived a privileged, if quiet, life as a civil servant of the Romans. But soon, a young Hasmonean nobleman seizes control of Jerusalem, overthrowing Roman rule. He is proclaimed King of the Jews. As a friend of the Romans, Herod knows his days in power are numbered. He flees Galilee and makes a bold move. Herod is eventually in a position where he begins to lose power, and he decides that he's going to go to Rome and convince the Senate that making him king of the Jews is the solution to all of their problems. In the dead of winter, Herod sets sail for Rome, seat of the greatest world power of his day and key to his success. Here, Herod seeks out his father's longtime friend and ally, statesman Mark Antony. Antony agrees to plead Herod's case before the Senate.
Now, the Romans didn't care about the genealogy of the Hasmonean dynasty. The Romans cared about who could best run the affairs of the kingdom of Judea. Judea was important. It was the main crossroads of the ancient world. Herod had talent. He was by far the smartest one around.
And so, in 40 BCE, the Roman Senate bestows the crown of Judea upon Herod. In gratitude, the new king of the Jews accompanies his Roman patrons to a temple on Capitoline Hill, where, according to legend, Rome itself was founded.
It seems to me the defining moment in Herod's career was when he ascended the Capitoline Hill with Mark Antony and Octavian to offer sacrifice to the gods of Rome. This connected Herod with bonds that would not be broken to Rome and to Roman patrons. And this defined for me his entire career.
With Rome's blessing, Herod returns to Judea to depose the Hasmonean king, whose anti-Roman policies have spread throughout the country. A brutal war between Herod's armies and Jewish forces will last nearly 3 years. Finally, with the help of Roman troops, Herod captures Jerusalem against the wishes of the very people he aims to rule.
Now the Jews that were enclosed within the walls of the city fought against Herod with great alacrity and zeal, for the whole nation was gathered together. Josephus, the Book of Antiquities.
As Herod enters Jerusalem triumphant, the Hasmonean king is sent to Rome to be executed. Now, Herod sits upon the throne. He is 36 years old and his enemies are many. How will he secure his hold on power?
Herod was an outsider in Judean society. What does an outsider do when he becomes an insider? You kill off all those connected with the old regime, all those whose claim to power is greater than yours, all those who might cause you trouble. You kill them, you send them off into exile, and you create a new aristocracy whose power is indebted entirely to you.
Some 15 miles northeast of Jerusalem, in a barren stretch of desert, lies one of the lowest spots on earth, Jericho. Situated in a valley almost 1,000 feet below sea level, Jericho is also one of the driest spots on earth. But a nearby spring turns the surrounding terrain into a green oasis, long renowned as an agricultural center. Jericho is no less remarkable for the archaeological remains that have come to light here. In the 1950s, excavations revealed the remains of a city nearly 10,000 years old, perhaps the oldest on Earth. And nearby, archaeologists have also uncovered the ruins of a palace built and enjoyed by the Hasmonean kings during their century-long reign over Judea. When Herod becomes king, he acquires this residence and adds his own distinctive flourishes. A Roman bath, in keeping with his classical upbringing and eclectic tastes, and a lavish, enormous swimming pool. In this very spot, some 2,000 years ago, Herod would commit the first of many murders of his own family members. What mad drive for power could bring a king to kill his own kin? By By Jewish law, the only legitimate heirs to the throne are the remaining members of the Hasmonean family. But Herod turns enemy into kin. He repudiates his first wife and marries a Hasmonean princess, Mariamne, granddaughter of the former king, impeccable in pedigree. Herod falls in love.
The Mariamne story is a real soap opera. It has a heroine. We assume she's very beautiful. We have a husband who's passionately in love with her. We have jealousy, we have intrigue, we have sex. We have everything we need for a wonderful story. Unfortunately, it's a tragedy.
Loyal to her family, Queen Mariamne pleads with Herod to bestow a prestigious honor upon her young brother, Aristobulus. At her request, Herod appoints this young man high priest of the temple in Jerusalem. Little does Mariamne know that she has sealed her brother's doom. Aristobulus is perhaps the youngest high priest the people of Jerusalem have ever seen. But when he officiates at the temple, their reaction is overwhelming.
For when this youth, Aristobulus, who was now in his 70th year of his age, went up to the altar, the people at once rejoiced. Josephus, the Book of Antiquities.
In Aristobulus, the Jews see not just the high priest, but the legitimate Hasmonean heir to the throne. Herod sees only a dangerous rival.
And Herod the Great, in his craziness and in his jealousy, saw the youth decked out in his ceremonial robes, saw the adoration which the people of Jerusalem had given to this comely youth now come back from his education abroad, saw that this young man was going to be a serious threat to him because the people loved him as they would never love the mad king.
Herod hatches a murderous plot. On a warm summer day, the court of King Herod enjoys a feast at the palace in Jericho. As the afternoon wears on, guests cool themselves in the large swimming pool. Herod encourages his young brother-in-law, Aristobulus, to enjoy the waters, where unseen danger awaits him.
With darkness coming on, while Aristobulus swam, some of the king's friends who had been given orders to do so kept pressing the young man down and holding him underwater as if in sport, and they did not let him up until they had quite drowned him. Josephus, the Book of Antiquities.
Mariamne knows only too well her brother's death was no accident.
Mariamne, I think, never forgave Herod. That poisoned, as I imagine at least, the relationship from then on. And Mariamne and Herod had a very stormy, very unsatisfactory, unhappy marriage.
Mariamne makes no attempt to contain her disgust for her husband. Such open contempt sends Herod into fits of rage.
Herod the Great was so madly in love with her that he was unable to think clearly. He was unable to reason. She, in her part, seems to have enjoyed goading him, since, after all, she was a proud Hasmonean princess. And who is Herod? Just a lowly Idumean.
Word of the queen's behavior spreads quickly, and Mariamne becomes an obvious target for palace intrigue.
On a couple of occasions when Herod left, there were rumors that Mariamne had had an affair with the person that Herod had left in charge, which of course created an impossible position.
Herod's mother and sister have long resented Mariamne's haughty bearing. Now they produce evidence against the queen. Mariamne is brought to trial for adultery and high treason. Whether she was indeed guilty remains a mystery. Only the outcome is clear. Herod makes a fatal decision and orders the execution of his beloved, the flower of Judea, who gave him 2 sons. As she dies, Herod descends into a living hell.
He would frequently lament for her and call for her as if she was still alive. He had an inflammation upon him and a madness in his head. The Book of Antiquities.
Herod succumbs to a deep depression and abandons affairs of state, but only briefly. His endless ambition drives him on. He soon finds cause to order the execution of Mariamne's mother, and eventually nearly every male with Hasmonean blood in his veins. To produce his own heirs to the throne, Herod will take 8 more wives during his lifetime, though polygamy violates Jewish law. More than anything, Herod dreams of immortal glory. Now he sets out to make an impression that will last an eternity. To Jews around the world, there is no holier sight than this, the western wall of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Here prayers are offered, tears are shed, and dead are remembered. These monumental stones are all that remain of the original Temple Mount, built some 2,000 years ago by Herod the Great.
In all the things which Herod the Great built in the land of Israel, the most extraordinary of all these buildings was the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It is, to this day, the largest religious structure ever made by one man in the history of the world.
Here, the last holy temple in the history of Jerusalem once rose toward the heavens. Here, a young Jesus once listened to the priests. Here, he cast out the money changers in a rare display of anger. And here, Christ made a fateful prediction.
Some of his disciples were remarking how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." Luke 21.
History would eventually confirm Christ's dire prophecy, but a great mystery would remain locked in these stones. Why did Herod, with his mixed blood and scant respect for Jewish law, build the most lavish holy temple Jerusalem had ever seen? For 5 long centuries, this temple has been worn by the footsteps of worshippers. By the time Herod becomes king, the holy temple shows the ravages of time.
Herod the Great realized that a great king in a great city, in a great kingdom, needed a temple that was larger, more grandiose, more impressive than that. And he set out to build a temple that, in fact, would become a tourist attraction, a temple of which both he and his subjects would be proud.
When the king announces his plans to rebuild the holy structure, his Jewish subjects are fearful. Could this simply be a ruse to get rid of their beloved temple?
The Jews of Jerusalem didn't want the king messing around with their holy temple at all, but they couldn't very well stop him. The story is that they wouldn't let him take away the old structure until he had completed the new structure around it.
Herod promises he will not begin building until all the raw materials for the new temple are assembled. Preparations alone will take over 2 years. Still, there remain serious religious concerns. According to Jewish law, only priests may set foot in the inner sanctum. How can common workers rebuild the temple without defiling the sacred site?
Herod would train a whole group of priests as carpenters and as masons and with all the necessary trades so that they could build the central holy place. He rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem in such a way that it never ceased offering sacrifice to the God of Israel for a single day.
The temple itself was built by the priests in a year and 6 months, upon which all the people were full of joy. Josephus, the Book of Antiquities.
With its facade of white marble, the temple shines like a snowy mountain in the sun. Precious gold adorns its entrance. Herod also enlarges the platform that supports the temple complex to a vast expanse of over 35 acres. Massive retaining walls are built of stones weighing 60 to 80 tons, so perfectly fitted that no mortar is used. Such expertise is still visible in the western wall of the Temple Mount. Herod's temple was one of many important cultural landmarks occurring around the world during the 1st century BCE. The Celts in Northern Ireland built a huge wooden fort called Navan as a ceremonial center. In China, court astronomers beat special bronze mirrors to ward off the evil spirits believed to appear during solar eclipses. And in Peru, master weavers produce some of the finest textiles in the Americas. In Judea, word of Herod's splendid temple attracts thousands of pilgrims to Jerusalem.
The Jewish reaction to the temple that Herod built, whether they hated him or not, was enormously positive, was overwhelmingly positive. It's very clear from the gospel stories that this temple was absolutely central to the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. They loved it. They came from all over the country to be present for the great pilgrimage festivals.
The Temple Mount alone would have secured Herod a place in history, but he continues to build as if driven by an obsession.
It was important for the kings to make huge monuments to themselves. The theory being that the monument lives after the king is dead, and if you want to ensure your own immortality, then you build something big that everybody will remember. I suppose every king must feel sort of like this. Just Herod did it.
It is the year 22 BCE when Herod embarks on a monumental project that will occupy a decade of his life. He will build an entire city from the ground up. Herod's great achievement will be called Caesarea Maritima, in honor of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus.
There's a suggestion in the accounts of Josephus that there was a little bit of rivalry between Augustus, the emperor, and Herod the Great. They all were great builders. It said of Augustus, for example, that when he came to power, Rome was a city of brick and he left it a city of marble. Well, Herod, I think, caught that sort of vision.
Herod aims to impress the emperor by overcoming nature herself and creating an entirely man-made harbor on this exposed coastline. According to Josephus, Herod began by building 2 monumental breakwaters. But how did Herod's workers maneuver these huge stones? Such technological feats seem far beyond the capabilities of engineers in the 1st century BCE. Then, in the 1980s, a team of archaeologists from Israel, the United States, and Canada solves this mystery. The largest blocks in the breakwater are not stone at all. They are made of hydraulic concrete, a kind of concrete that pours and hardens underwater. The Romans had invented hydraulic concrete a century earlier when they discovered that a special mortar made of lime and volcanic ash hardens when it comes in contact with water. But the Middle East had never seen such technology.
Herod imported the use of hydraulic concrete. It was nothing new in Italy, but it was totally unknown in this part of the world when he built his harbor. The archaeologists probably have learned more about the technology of using hydraulic concrete for harbor construction here than in any other site in the Mediterranean.
How did Herod's engineers work with hydraulic concrete? Archaeologists have reconstructed a likely scenario.
They built what we call single-use barges. Now, these are wooden barges that were built on or near the shore and were towed into position, then filled with hydraulic concrete so that the weight of the concrete caused them to sink to the sea floor.
2,000 years later, remnants of the barge's wooden frames are still embedded in the concrete or have left their impression there. Completed in a mere 13 years, Caesarea sparkles upon the shore, a thriving port city dominated by a dazzling temple to Augustus and Rome. Warehouses along the shore house goods en route to and from Rome and the East. An aqueduct supplies fresh water from springs fully 9 miles distant. Not an inch of the vast waterway is open to the elements. City residents enjoy performances in a theater that seats 3,500. Caesarea is the crowning achievement of Herod the Great's ambition, completed in the king's 63rd year. Herod's nation, though subject to Roman rule, is prosperous and at peace. But this will be no golden age for the king.
A melancholy solitude rendered the kingdom quite the opposite from that happy state it was formerly in. Herod's own life was entirely disturbed because he could trust no one. Josephus, the Book of Antiquities.
More and more, Herod retreats to the isolated palace fortresses he has built in the remote wilderness outside Jerusalem. Of these, Masada epitomizes his sense of style. Here, an exquisite palace built in 3 terraces seems to hang from the sheer cliffs. Mosaics, frescoes, and Roman baths provide all the pleasures of refined civilization in the midst of a savage desert. But this palace also reveals another side of Herod.
There is something of the aesthete about Herod. He enjoyed beautiful places. He enjoyed entertaining his friends in remarkable settings. There's also a lot of paranoia visible in these buildings. Herod obviously needed places he could take himself and his family if his enemies overtook him, as they constantly threatened to do.
To protect his throne, Herod has murdered courtiers, priests, even his beloved wife. Now, near the end of his life, Herod may face the ultimate threat to his reign. In a place called Bethlehem, a new king of the Jews is born in a manger. This rival's name is Jesus. Near the end of the reign of Herod the Great, a momentous event takes place within his realm. A child is born in Bethlehem.
Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. Luke 2:10.
Word of Christ's birth spreads quickly, attracting foreigners to Judea.
After Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Matthew 2:3.
According to the Bible, Herod summons the wise men and entreats them to find the child so that he too might honor him. But the king is lying. His real intentions are unveiled after the Magi find the Holy Family and Joseph has an alarming dream.
An angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." Matthew 2:13.
The Holy Family flees and the Magi never return to Herod. The king will commit an act of horror unparalleled in the New Testament.
When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious and gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years and under. Matthew 2:16.
The Bible's account is the only telling of what has come to be known as the slaughter of the innocents. Even Josephus, in his detailed biography of Herod, makes no mention of this crime. Is it possible the atrocity never occurred?
My own guess is that the account is a legend more than history. My guess is that Herod didn't know that Jesus had been born and had no reason to try to find him and to get rid of him.
Perhaps Herod's reputation as a cold-blooded executioner helped make the story believable.
Herod the Great was paranoid. Herod the Great did kill off his opponents. Herod the Great was afraid of rival claimants to the throne. Those elements are true, and those elements, I think, are the building blocks of the story.
The suspicions that have tormented Herod throughout his life accompany him into old age. He has married 10 times. Now, half a dozen sons jostle for succession. 2 adult sons by his beloved Mariamne, Alexander and Aristobulus, would seem to be the heirs apparent to the throne with their royal Hasmonean blood. But they treat their father with equal parts of hatred and fear.
They obviously did not like Herod. They were, of course, profoundly opposed to his execution of their mother many years earlier. And there seems to have been a mutual hostility between Herod and these 2 children, even though they offered the best hope for an orderly and peaceful succession to Herod after he died.
Like their mother, Mariamne's sons become the targets of palace intrigue. Soon, a half-brother with his own designs upon the throne accuses them of treason. Their claims of innocence remain in doubt to this day.
It's not completely clear that these 2 sons are completely innocent. That is, they may well have been plotting to take over power, or at least to try to have their father pushed aside so that they would be able to become kings in his stead.
Herod testifies against his own sons in a hasty trial which finds them guilty. By the king's order, they are summarily strangled.
The execution of Aristobulus and Alexander means that Herod the Great has personally, systematically wiped out all the remnants of the Hasmonean family.
Now at last, the bloody cycle of fear and suspicion must end. Now at last, it is Herod's time to die. Soon, he retreats to his palace at Jericho, ravaged by a swarm of diseases.
There was a gentle fever upon him, an intolerable itching all over the surface of his body, continual pains in his colon, and tumors about his feet, an inflammation of the abdomen, and a putrefaction of his private member that produced worms. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
Herod knows he is dying and orders that preparations be made for a grand funeral at a place called Herodian. Here, 8 miles south of Jerusalem, Herod had accomplished yet another engineering feat. He had reshaped an entire mountain. Within its summit, he built an unusual circular palace. The luxurious living quarters included a Roman-style bath and garden courtyard once stocked with exotic plants. In life, Herod has made of Herodium a pleasure palace. In death, he will make it his tomb. Even on his deathbed, Herod retains an iron grip on power. He orders the execution of his eldest son, already imprisoned for treason.
He was never too sick to secure his kingdom. And in the end, he ordered the arrest of the noble men, of the important men of every village in Judea, with instructions that when he, Herod, were to die, they would kill the lot of them, so that the people of Judea who wouldn't mourn his death would have something to mourn about.
Only days after issuing this dreadful command to kill thousands of noblemen, Herod dies. His final order is mercifully ignored, and the men are released. All Judea rejoices. It is the year 4 BCE. According to Josephus, Herod's remaining family mounts a funeral procession worthy of a great king. They carry his body to Herodian and bury him there. But Herod's tomb eludes us to this very day.
Scholars and archaeologists have been looking for Herod's tomb for 100 years. And very intensively in the last 10 or 15 years, they have not found the tomb of Herod the Great, despite everything that can be done technologically to look for it. Why not? That remains one of the great mysteries of the extraordinary life of this extraordinary king.
Herod left behind a string of ineffective heirs. Less than 70 years after his death, a Jewish uprising brings down the wrath of the Roman Empire. The city of Jerusalem is reduced to unspeakable ruin. The magnificent temple is destroyed. Only the western wall of the Temple Mount remains, a sacred site to this day. Today, these monumental stones of Herod's Temple Mount bespeak a powerful king. The ancient texts preserve his name in faded ink.
He combined Roman politics, Greek culture, Eastern savagery, and Jewish sensitivity in a way which makes it almost impossible to grasp what this man must have been like. It can't be that he was simply crazy, because he wasn't. He was an enormously vigorous, effective, intelligent, active ruler. He left fantastic buildings in a campaign which has never been equaled in the whole history of the country. And yet, in the end, the heart of his being remains mysterious. In the end, the man was greater than our attempt to get a handle on him.
Perhaps Josephus best describes the enduring enigma that was Herod the Great.
He was a man of great barbarity to all, and a slave to his passions. Yet he was favored by fortune as much as any man ever was, for from a private man he became a king. Josephus, the Book of Antiquities.
Welcome back. I'm sorry about the sound in the beginning. I think it got better. So Rob, I turn it back to you.
Okay, great. One second, sorry. What I think I'd like to do is what I alluded to before we started the video, which is to sort of pick up with something that's remarkable, noteworthy, amazing. The movie was made, I think, in 1995. I'm not sure, for A&E. And the movie ends, as far as sites in Israel go, with Herodian. So what I want to do is I want to show you some pictures and discuss the remarkable discovery that took place there in 2007. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. This is the only site in Israel that is actually named after King Herod. So here, let me see if I can share my screen with you. I'm going to tell you. Let's see. Okay. So something that's interesting about being a guide in Israel is if I really, some guides are really good at making up stories. I'm actually not one of those guides that make up stories. I might be able to tell a good story, but if people ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I will often say, I don't know the answer. Let's look into it. Similarly, something that happens more and more these days is I can be touring people and stand in front of something where I can say to them, listen, had we been here 10 years ago, or had we been here 20 years ago, I would have been telling you something different about this site. A lot of this has to do just with the fact that our archaeology is becoming more and more advanced, more and more sources are being discovered, and sometimes it's the expansion of a site which reveals something that we didn't know before. For example, in the city of David, how it is that they actually got water into the city. Today, we tell a different story than what we would have told 10 or 20 years ago. So the reason why I'm showing you the picture in front of you now is it used to be that we walked in Jerusalem behind the King David Hotel, where there's a really nice park, kind of near the neighborhood of Yamin Moshe, if you remember. And we came across this kind of archaeological excavation. It's not active or anything, but I'm going to use my pointer again because it's a little hard to see exactly what we're talking about here. There are steps that go down into, you can see a little bit of an archway covered by a caper bush. And you can see to the left of the archway, this is actually the top of a rolling stone. Let me show you a little bit of a better picture of this. This is walking down into the steps. This is the archway. And this, now you can really see, is literally a rolling stone. We've all heard of the magazine, we've heard of the rock band, but this is the original type of rolling stone. It was used in the ancient world for burial caves. So I'm going to get to we used to stand behind the King David Hotel in the park, and we would say to people, folks, you're looking at King Herod's tomb. The truth was, I don't know if anyone had any evidence of it being King Herod's tomb, but King Herod's tomb had not been found yet. In 2007, King Herod's tomb was found in a different location. Now we bring people back here, we say, you're looking at King Herod's family's tomb. Hopefully we're right there that some relatives are buried in there. So this is a burial cave. In the Second Temple period, we have hundreds of these around Jerusalem. You go into the cave and they would place the bodies there, wait for the bodies to completely decompose, and then come back and put the bodies usually in a small box called an ossuary. And this rolling stone serves a purpose. If you think about it, if this is a doorway into the cave, if it was to be left open, unfortunately, animals, and maybe grave robbers, but probably animals, what they were mostly concerned about, would go into the cave. So this is the rolling stone that would be rolled across the entrance so that animals couldn't get in. One of the reasons why the rolling stone is famous is because in the story of Jesus, when they go to check and see his burial place, and he ends up not being there, they have to roll back the rolling stone. So Christians are very much aware of this ancient practice. But I just wanted to talk about that for a moment in the sense that we visit sites today in Israel that we now know more based upon newer discoveries. So the picture that we're looking now is the mountain. This is above, of course, looking at the Mountain of Herodian. Now, Herodian is really well described by Josephus. And Josephus tells us that this is an artificial mountain. And it is, in fact. If you were to stand on the top of this mountain and look in this general direction, a little bit outside of the frame here, you would see a smaller mountain. So Herod had workers. Some people ask, were they slaves? Were they workers? We generally actually think they were workers. And he had them build this artificial tall mountain. And inside of this artificial mountain, you can see at the top here is where the palace was built. Okay, I'm going to give I think I have a little bit more of a detailed picture of this. Yes. This is actually from now the side. You're on the top of the mountain. You're sitting on the side of what is on the inside like a bowl. The bowl is what they used to create the palace. And you can see how well preserved this is. You can see that the ramp heading down into the palace, there were gardens here, there were bathhouses here, and there were huge towers on each side of this palace. So we're basically about 7 miles south of Jerusalem, a little bit to the east. The view is out to the desert. And this site isn't visited as much as Herod's other sites because, number one, it's a little bit into the West Bank. And during the time of conflict here, this wasn't always the safest place to go to. Now it is safer, and especially after the discovery, there's a lot more people going there. But you still have to be kind of careful on the way there. I'm going to go ahead and show you another picture. This is what remains of this massive tower that faces towards the east. And the movie tells us a little about it. I'm gonna end my talk and we'll enter into questions just with this man here. His name is Professor Ehud Netzer. Ehud Netzer, alav shalom, he committed his life as an archaeologist to Herod, absolutely obsessed with the life of Herod. This began actually in the 1960s when he was side by side with Yigal Yadin excavating Masada. And in fact, for those of you who have been to Masada and seen the movie that you watched before you go up there, it's Ehud Netzer who's interviewed about what are some of the most remarkable finds at Masada. So Ehud Netzer developed 40 years of his professional life. He is pursuing Herod, and in particular, this question of where is Herod buried and where is his tomb? Okay, and go to the next. And this is what he found. This, you have to have a little bit of a keen eye to see what we're looking at, but I'm using the pointer again here. And see the pointer is down here at the bottom of this picture. This is a base of a large structure, beautiful stonework. But unfortunately, the structure was not discovered. Only the base of the structure was discovered. Now, as Rabbi Isaac was saying when I was coming on, Josephus tells us that Herod was buried here at Herodian. But despite searching everywhere from below Herodian up on top of Herodian, it was never found until in 2007, Ehud Netzer found some fragments of what seemed like a sarcophagus and he started to search in this area, and he had to peel back tons of stone in order to get to this level. And because the tomb had been destroyed probably by the Jewish rebels between the years 66 and 70, Herod was still like a symbol of Roman rule. They probably came here to Herodion, which we know they hid there during the uprising, during the revolt. They probably destroyed this tomb. So this is what a replica of what the tomb now being rebuilt. You can see this when you go to Herodion, and it's modeled on other types of tombs for leaders. The problem here is there's still a lot of debate. Most people believe that this is actually too modest for Herod. What Ehud Netzer felt is that this is the tomb, and that the mountain itself is like a pyramid. Instead of being in the shape of a pyramid, in a triangular shape, the mountain itself was meant to be the monument to Herod, a man-made mountain, just like a pyramid is. We go a little bit forward. This is Ehud Netzer next to the reconstructed sarcophagus. They found many, many pieces of the sarcophagus. And again, many people think this is too modest for Herod. That's what the naysayers, and we're still not 100% sure about this. What I want to finish with is actually a very sad, tragic, poignant thing about Ehud Netzer. So in 2007, he discovers this tomb. If you may recall, there was a worldwide exhibition based on this discovery that traveled the world. I saw it here at the Israel Museum. But Ehud Netzer in 2008, when they're continuing to excavate Herodion, and they have now found a theater in Herodion, and he's leaning against a stone or a pillar, and the stone gives way, and he actually falls several meters within the theater, and 3 days later, he dies of his wounds. So it's just one of these incredible stories that I wanted to share with you. It's not a happy story, but it's the story of a man who devoted 40 years of his life to find something. He found it, and then a year later, in the very same place, fell to his death. And I'll just conclude by saying that as a guide who works here in Israel, on the one hand, you can tell the story of King Herod with all of his passions and his compulsions and the things that drove him in his life. And then you tell the story of Ehud Netzer with all of his passions and compulsions and everything that drove him in his life. And you can see that these two men are basically on opposite ends of the spectrum of what life is all about. And this is what is the beautiful tapestry of the story of Israel through its history and through its modern times. And I just wanted to share that with you as a way to kind of conclude the way the movie had left this question open for us. So I know that we wanted to leave some time for questions. I don't know if people have been writing or chatting or how we want to do this. I'll turn things back over to Rabbi Isaac and Michelle for their guidance here.
Rob, that was fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
And I loved every minute, and I bet you all of our viewers loved every minute. So my first question is to Michelle, because someone put in the chat that they wanted to know about the recording. And so Michelle, can you just tell us how the recording will be available?
Yes. Actually, Rob, if you can stop sharing your screen as well.
Oh yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
That's okay. No worries. Then I can see everybody. Yes, we will have the recording probably. I'll try to get it tomorrow when we send out our follow-up to everyone, and we will have a recording that will be a YouTube link that will include with the follow-up.
Great. The one question that came from Lori Fendel, you sort of answered it, but her question was, how did Herod have, who did Herod have to build these buildings? I mean, if he...
Yeah, so Josephus doesn't give us a lot of information. One other source, I should say, that I didn't mention earlier is the Talmud. Herod is also mentioned in the Talmud. Sometimes we don't know if they're speaking of Herod or just Roman rule in general. To answer that question, I go back to the temple. Josephus tells us, the movie did a decent job of this, of saying the Jews were so concerned because, let's take a step back. Within the temple, we know that there are certain areas that only a Kohen can go into, and there are certain areas that only a Levite can go into, and then there's places that other Jews can go into, and there was even an area where non-Jews could go into. As I said, this was a major tourist site. The Jews were very concerned about a non-Kohen or a non-Levite stepping into the spiritual space within the temple compound. And so the movie talked about this a little bit, and Josephus tells us that in fact, thousands of priests were trained to be builders. You know, you're talking about decorating stone and building with stone and putting stone together. Thousands of priests were trained so as to respect the Jewish tradition. So I can't answer the question as far as Caesarea is concerned and other places are concerned. We just have to assume he had tons of workers that were well funded from the Roman Empire. And only in the case of the temple itself do we have a more detailed answer to give. So I see Priscilla just wrote, maybe that was just a note to me. One of the things that the movie talks about is that the Kotel is the only remnant of the temple. And today that's not really true. And this was all developing at the time that the movie was made. Today there's tunnels that go down deeper to the base of the wall itself. As I said, 70 feet beneath the plaza that you look at in pictures. And that tunnel continues to follow to the north all the way into the Muslim quarter and comes out in on the Via Dolorosa. And in that tunnel, they have discovered mikvahs, they found another theater, they have aqueducts, and lots of the area around the Temple Mount has been excavated, and we now know more archaeologically about the temple. The fact is, no one, I mean, at least, no one officially has been underneath the Temple Mount. It is every archaeologist's dream to actually dig right under the Temple Mount, but that's where the Holy Muslim buildings are, and so that would be completely controversial and would cause bedlam in the streets of Jerusalem. The last person to have gone down there is an archaeologist in the 1880s. So it's just kind of interesting how politics and sensitivities can actually get in the way of science, but for understandable reasons.
There were rumors for years that Muslims were going under the temple to destroy whatever Jewish remnants there is. So I'm surprised that the Israeli government or pressures have not allowed them to go and search.
Yeah, it's not really rumors, by the way. What happened under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, not the Dome of the Rock, but really the holy building for the Muslims on the Temple Mount is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And what they were doing was they were expanding some of the underground prayer rooms. And they literally brought a bulldozer up onto the Temple Mount, and they were digging and they were dumping. I mean, this is a story that I'll try to make as short as I can, but it's a beautiful story. They were dumping the dirt from the Temple Mount itself into the Kidron Valley next door. A very quick story, a teacher of mine, Gabi Bar-Kai, who today is like in his 80s, but he was a younger professor at this time, and two students showed up at his door at night, and they had buckets of dirt in their hands. And he's an old curmudgeon now, and he was even a curmudgeon then, and he was like really upset with him. Why are you coming to my house? Why are you bothering me? And they said, you have to see this. And they brought the buckets of dirt. Now, this dirt had been collected from all that dirt that had been dumped from the work that was being done by the Waqf, that's the Muslim authorities, and putting the dirt into the Kidron Valley. They bring it to his kitchen table, they put down some newspaper, and they dump it. And they start finding bones and coins and tiles. I mean, it's just filled with rich material. And it was Gabi Bar-Kai who asked the Antiquities authorities to help him put together a sifting station the members of my family, which quick shout out to the Kahn family who's watching right now. We've done this project together because they take volunteers. They've had over 60,000 volunteers now who have been going through buckets and buckets of dirt and finding jewelry and finding coins, etc. And it actually has taught us a lot about the Temple Mount. The last thing is, again, it's an amazing story. It's the only archaeological site in the world that was not done what's called in situ. It wasn't on site. And that, of course, makes it very difficult because in an archaeological dig, you use stratification. You dig, and you know that historically you are going deeper and deeper and deeper into history. This sifting project lost all stratification, and they had to do the best they could to date things based upon how much they were finding and style and that kind of thing. So to get back to your question, Rabbi Isaac, or your point, yeah, I mean, the Jewish, now have secret things happened? Have there been, you know, little expeditions underneath the Temple Mount? Quite, maybe, except for the Waqf, these Muslim authorities on the Temple Mount are very diligent and probably are keeping an eye out for that kind of thing. There's stories that come up once in a while about these things.
So Herod lives at the same time as Mark Antony. We're putting this in the context.
Yeah.
I seem to remember there was actually even some interaction between Herod and Cleopatra.
Yeah, so Mark Antony and Cleopatra from Egypt, right? There is I think the movie told this, I'm not sure, but in the year 40, Herod is in the Galil. He's in northern Israel. He's kind of the governor of that province, one might say. When the Parthians come from the east and actually conquer Israel. So this is one of these cases where he has to use his political acumen. He can either warm up to the Parthians and continue to rule, or he can flee to Rome and convince the Romans, you've got a problem here in Israel. And that's when he gets with Mark Antony and Augustus Caesar and Cleopatra. He becomes friends with them. He makes offerings to their gods, and he wins their support. So much so that 3 years later, in the year 37 BCE, he goes back to Israel with a Roman army and defeats the Parthians. It wasn't an easy war, and it took a long time, but he defeats them, and then he is the king of Israel. Again, not king, more like governor, but you're right. Mark Antony, Augustus Caesar, Cleopatra, these were the people supporting him.
You know, in school, we in public school, you learn world history, and in Hebrew school, you learn Jewish history, and putting one inside the other and understanding that they're all going on at the same time is really very, very exciting.
Yeah, in tour guide school, we spend a lot of time on the Jewish history, the Muslim history, the Christian history, and then you have to put it all into the world history. It's a lot to remember. It's a very challenging time during those 2 years of tour guide school, keeping all that in your head. And sometimes I'll be touring around the country and I will see a current class of the tour guide school with their notepads and writing down everything the guide says. And in some ways I'm kind of envious of them because I remember that at that point, I knew more than I ever knew, because you just start to slowly lose it because you can't have all that information in your head. By the way, if people, first of all, it's a reasonably long program. People might need to leave, but if people need to ask me general questions about Israel, what's going on with Corona, where do things stand today? We have elections coming up for the 4th time. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on here.
Well, thank you very much. This was terrific, and I think everybody really enjoyed this. Being with you, seeing you. We have, you know, many people haven't seen you since your bar mitzvah.
Well, I come back as the kind of guest darshan when my many nieces and nephews have had their bar mitzvah. But I thank you very much. It was very kind of you to reach out to me and ask me to be part of this. I saw, I'm looking at these chats that are coming through. I'm kind of keeping an eye on you at the same time as chats. The religion of Herod, I'll just quickly get to that because Randy asked. So Herod's father was Idumean, I-D-U-M, Idumean, but it's the land of Edom. And the land of Edom, 2 generations before Herod, was conquered by the Hasmoneans, Jews, and really forcibly converted. All in all, I mean, I have to be careful here, and all in all, you can look throughout Jewish history and almost find no examples of forced conversion. But the Hasmoneans, for a couple of generations, when they conquered the neighboring countries, so the Idumeans were forced to convert to Judaism. Herod's grandfather, right? So his father and grandfather are Idumean. So Herod has that kind of Jewishness to him. His mother was Nabatean. For anyone who's been to Petra in Jordan, the capital of the Nabateans, so his mother is Nabatean. Now Herod had some Jewishness to him, but was not a practicing Jew. He was a practicing Roman, trying to keep the peace of the various different people to whom he was either that he owed his allegiance to, or that were serving him. So I would say he was Roman with some Jewish, part Jewish character or ethnicity, I guess. Okay, so once again,
12:45.
thank you so much.
And late for
and
you.
Everyone stay healthy and stay warm, and God willing, we'll actually be able to walk in the beautiful country of Israel together at some point again.
So
Thank
those who
you
wish to
so
stay,
much.
but we'll end the program here. Thank you.
Yes, and
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to keep it open for a little while if anyone wants to chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Rob, thank you so much. Really wonderful.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again. Take care and hang in there.
You want it open? Oh,
Hi, Rob. This is Mylan Shanker. You've had a busy day today, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, most of my days are not very busy, but are you alluding to the Kahn vacation that I attended earlier?
Yes, congratulations.
Yeah, JTS every once in a while honors rabbis who were ordained 25 years ago. And so I was in that program when I got this message from, I think, either Michelle or my brother, kind of like, where are you? And we had a little bit of a miscommunication about the start here. But yeah, this is like the busiest night I've had since last March.
Yeah. Well, usually I spend Shabbat with Rabbi Cameras and Cantor Jackie. I don't know if you've ever listened to them, but so Rabbi Cameras also got this degree. So.
Yeah, so I don't know if you realize it, but Rabbi Cameras and I are really close dear friends. We were partners going through rabbinical school. He's a very dear friend of mine. Yeah, and he's got a wonderful synagogue out there in Los Angeles.
Yeah, every time I see him, on Zoom, he always says, "Make sure you tell the Kahns hello from me."
That's good.
He's a very nice guy. I like him. So,
Mylan,
how are
I don't
things
think
in Israel?
I don't think you're supposed to be telling while your rabbi is on the Zoom call that you're visiting other synagogues on Shabbat morning. You got to be careful here.
Yeah, that's okay.
We won't tell anyone, Mylan.
Sometimes,
You know what? I dive in there during rabbinical school when I lived in Woodland Hills, and I was interning at Aliyah, so I just walked the other way sometimes and visited up there at Shomrei.
He's probably just recording and actually going to your show live anyway, so it's all good.
Well, I usually have like 2 or 3 computers going on, and so I'm keeping an eye on what's going on. It's they never show them, so don't feel bad.